Welcome to the next chapter of Mina Star, a near-future epic about humanity's reckoning after the collapse of the insane logic of mutually assured destruction, tracing how the ruins of the nation-state order give rise to the Charter. A new consensus-driven civilization built on the principle that every life is sovereign. In this chapter, we follow Makar Moroz, a former child prisoner who becomes a mercenary commander, enduring to bear witness and fighting with disciplined resolve. Prison, occupied Estonia. 2027. After Russian forces invaded the Baltics and sealed the Suwalki Gap, the new authorities, taking orders from Moscow, filled prisons with civilians who would later become forced labor. The pit smelled of rust and old blood, but after 3 years, the stench blurred into the background hum of survival. Makar Moroz was 15 when they threw him in. His cheek still carried the ridges of the transport van floor, stamped there by hours beneath a guard's boot. He had come packed with abducted civilians who had been teachers, bus drivers, farmers, even a concert pianist. None were armed resistors. None had charges. The invaders needed labor, so laborers were found. On Makar's first day, Arvo's broad hand steadied him, feet flat and knees tucked. If you fall, they kick you until you don't rise. Better to stay standing even if a little crooked. Arvo smiled warmly at the last part. Arvo, once just a lead bus mechanic, had become the anchor everyone clung to. He never called himself a leader, but when he divided bread, people obeyed, even as hunger made them feral. What killed wasn't the beatings, or the fingers snapped for boredom, or even the nights when they came for their vile pleasures. It was when men lost hope. Arvo knew that. He assigned tasks, first aid, ration counts, simple inventory, not because they mattered, but because purpose itself mattered. Routine was armor. Some people gave up, which was their choice, but it was not Makar's. He would survive and right this wrong. They worked long, grueling hours. Failure to meet quota brought beatings, but if someone was defiant, the authorities slipped the bag over the head. A thin plastic bag, a dry whisper before panic, 3 breaths before the fire clawed the chest. Sometimes they pulled it off. Sometimes they waited until faces turned blue. Arvo's rule was simple: survive. Do whatever they ask. Keep your pride and die, or yield and live. If you live, you bear witness. And to bear witness, you must survive. The guards had no names, only shoes. Chrome liked the electrodes, precise in his cruelty. Squeak favored stress positions, laughing as men collapsed. Plier boots broke bones as if counting beads on a rosary. They called the prisoners animals. Makar joined the animals by answering with poems murmured into cupped hands, with chessboards traced in soot on the floor, with songs hummed so low only those pressed shoulder to shoulder could hear. Not every guard was a savage. Some played the role under the warden's eye, but once a guard dropped bandages into the yard, hands shaking, his stare wild with shame. Another time, a sack of potatoes accidentally rolled too close to the fence. Makar never knew whether these were accidents or silent rebellions. What he learned was simpler. People everywhere do what they must to survive. But in a world built on cruelty, survival can turn anyone into a monster. For Makar, language became revelation. His village near Narva had spoken Russian, but the authorities treated his neighbors no differently than the civilians of Aleppo or Gao. His brothers and sisters of the pit spoke words from around the world, from English, Polish, Estonian to Lithuanian. As a child, I used to think Russian was my heritage because I spoke Russian, he whispered once to Arvo, shame squeezing his chest. Arvo's face was swollen from a beating, but his eyes were steady as he put his arm around Makar's shoulders. It is your heritage. They don't get to define who you are. Remember, Joseph was sold by his own brothers. Everyone has birth families. But true family are the ones who pass you bread and bind your wounds. Russian, Latvian, or Finn, you are my family. When new prisoners came, Arvo pushed something into the guard's hand, then pushed Makar forward despite Makar resisting. The boy goes. He spoke it with authority. Makar stepped into the light, and his stomach clenched as he saw Arvo and his brothers and sisters left behind in the pit. Makar fiercely told himself, I am a witness. Madrid, Spain, 2033. 5 years later, Makar stepped off a flight in Madrid under a false Belarusian passport. As he approached a black SUV that idled with hazard lights, the Spanish sun beat on his bare head. Fighting through the smell of asphalt and ozone was the hint of wild thyme and fennel. Inside the SUV sat a big Yoruba man with the frame like a rugby center. Adewale Ajayi, who taught him how to hot rig a fiber optic spool in a forest outside of Vilnius, smiled broadly and clasped Makar's hand as he entered. Behind the wheel was a svelte Frenchman named Lucien Vey, who looked more like a fashionista than a field handler. The Russian regime wants the prime minister dead on camera, Lucien said as he swerved past a protest. Students with cardboard signs chanted in front of a line of guardia in riot gear. Shields gleamed in the sun. A baton came down harder than it needed to. They're paying the guardia to crack heads, while paying protesters to march. While Spain tears itself apart, NATO grows weaker. It is the same hybrid war playbook they use around the world. The safe house in Lavapiés was as bare as a coffin. Plain white walls, a table covered in layered maps, and black cases that snapped open to reveal drones. Officially, it was an abandoned industrial site that smelled of dust and oil. Makar leaned over looking at the maps, while surreptitiously studying his people. Tomas and Pilar, Colombian twins he'd fought beside near Turku, watched him with hawk eyes. Andri's breath reeked, but he could wire a charge blindfolded. Oksana could outlift most men, and once carried 2 miles while Makar bled. Serhi stole food, fuel, radios, but in Tijuana, theft saved the team. Mart and Katrine wanted only one thing, revenge for the children they'd lost. Rasmus snored like a cave-in, but when the fight came, his hands were steady as a surgeon. They were ordinary once. Now they were part of the Green Company. He tapped the map of Madrid. We all know how the hot phase ended, he said. He told them what they all already knew, because it mattered that the words be spoken aloud. Makar thought to himself, we can't move on. We can't let go. We must remember. Makar continued speaking. Russia ran out of cash. Their front lines starved. Veterans marched on Moscow, and when the Kremlin was cornered, they fired one topol at Chicago. He saw their faces harden at the memory of when the world shifted. American air defense failed. In the last minute, the missile self-destructed above the Magnificent Mile. 10,000 dead outright, 50,000 died slowly from radiation sickness. And that generation of Americans? They turned inward and locked the doors. Despite the American homeland being assaulted, the isolationists chose the appeasement of Blue Judas, allowing the Russian regime to close the Suwalki Gap and invade the Baltics, disallowing the use of American armaments for defense. Rasmus shed a silent tear but stood stock still. The Americans left us to face the horrors alone. The Second Cold War started shortly after the guns stopped, but this time NATO stood alone. Putin never brought his veterans home. They were sent abroad, hidden behind the masks of private military companies. Makar saw the hardened bitterness reflected in each face. The Green Company does what governments will not. We stand in the gap between ordinary people trying to live their best life and the tyranny of the nuclear powers. America used to provide balance, but we live in the world we have, and not the one we wish we had. Serhiy squinted his gray eyes and looked around the room. We fought Tiraspol as they trained the cartels in ambushes that left ICE agents shredded along the American border. Makar shuddered as a memory flashed into his mind. I can still remember the ICE agents' contempt of our drone warfare training, but mourned each agent's funeral, seeing their grieving spouses and children. They just refused to listen. Thomas, with a scar from his collarbone down to his right arm, nodded at the memory of those dark early days before security measures caught up to drones, then squeezed his sister tight as her right eye aggressively twitched. She developed a nervous tic that flared when the past was discussed. Pilar and I helped thwart a coup in Azerbaijan organized by Amu Darya Security. Andriy stood proudly. We fought against Condor International's efforts to create breakaway regions in the Amazon. Makar smiled as he remembered how tribal folks were naturally talented at hunting the military contractors. Rasmus breathed heavily and whispered through his cut vocal cords. We demolished Kshatra Solutions in Nagaland, where they launched raids on the Myanmar rebels. Warmth filled the room as the team reminisced about the Green Company's victories against Russia's influence campaigns. Makar felt pride fill him, but he sobered, knowing death was like a tiger purring their names. NATO-E officially deny support, but unofficially they hire us to fight their shadow war. And now the war has arrived in Europe, starting with the Volga Group in Spain. Lucien stepped in. Officially, we are a Swiss private security group here to provide crowd control for the Prime Minister's upcoming speech in the Plaza de España. But the Prime Minister's guards are sidelining us. But they are not prepared for a fiber-optic drone assassination. These are not the standard drones NATO-E counters for. These carried spools of hardened fiber, resistant to jamming, flying fast and dumb but lethal. The kind of drone that slipped past NATO-E doctrine entirely. The EIC contract gets us in the security perimeter, but we do not have Spanish support. After a moment of shocked silence at the brazenness of the operation, Rasmus asked softly, barely above a whisper, "Why risk a NATO-E response?" "Because the Prime Minister, Ismael Cortázar Ruiz, is loudly anti-Russian," Lucien said, speaking with authority. "He's been arming insurgent groups in the occupied areas through Spanish state-supported arms contracts, pushing for stiffer sanctions on Russia in Brussels, and calling Moscow out for the surge of violence driven by Russian-affiliated PMCs. The wave of al-Qaeda violence that followed the CIA-trained Mujahideen pales in comparison to the hundreds of thousands of decommissioned, well-trained drone operators, making €500,000 per kill mission. Heads nodded as they all benefited from the demand of the specialized drone skill that slipped through the gaps of most security systems. But he's also throwing migrants into camps and choking autonomy at home. Half the country hates him, and the other half depends on him. His death on live television fractures Spain and rattles NATO-E. Adewale's expression hardened. Volga Group's dream contract. Madrid, Spain, next day. As the team unpacked the crates in the safe house warehouse, Oksana asked, "What has the Carpathian dreamed up this time? And where is my lovely little man?" Makar laughed at the latest drama between the broad-shouldered Oksana and Takumi, their diminutive, brilliant engineer. Fiber-optic concussive drones dropped from a lighter-than-air platform. The room went very quiet because of the most recent operations disaster. Andriy muttered, "We tried that in Nagaland. The elevation helped, but fiber-optic drones still cut us apart." Pilar's voice snapped like a whip, the most anyone had heard from her in months. Elevation gave us first eyes, gave us faster kill chains. But it was still too slow to save her. Each word landed louder, raw with anger. Makar let the moment sit as everyone remembered vivacious Irina. He raised his palms. "This isn't the same." The Carpathian made the platform's brains smarter. The platform creates a baseline defense grid with radar, LiDAR, and acoustics based on data built up over time. Oksana and Andriy will raise it as soon as we can. The longer it sits, the smarter it gets. The rest, scatter mics far beyond the perimeter. The acoustic shield buys us seconds to know where the assassins are coming from. Adewale cracked his knuckles. And we're on drone duty. Makar nodded. Drones split in pairs with one as munition and the other as detonator. Thermobaric overpressure means no shrapnel in the dense urban environment. Enough to swat a Russian fiber-optic assassin from above out of the sky. Adewale nodded. A bigger boom. No one smiled. Too many prototypes had already ended in funerals. On the way to the Plaza de España, Lucien called Inspector Jefe Marta Aguilar to coordinate setting up the defensive perimeter. The Inspector Aguilar was fiercely critical and challenged Lucien why the intel on the third suspected assassination attempt was any better than the earlier false alarms. The team overheard the inspector incredulously ask, "You want me to sign off on an unregistered airship in Madrid airspace loaded with bombs?" Eventually, Lucien used enough EIC authority to get her to sign off, but she ended the call with a final warning that if flak came her way, that she will move heaven and hell to make Lucien pay. Pre-dawn light silvered the cobblestones of the plaza with hot stone radiating even at dawn. The faint kerosene smell drifted in from Barajas, and the smell of fresh baked bread mixed with trash pickup. Trucks backed in through service gates with stamped papers, cargo listed as telecommunications equipment. Reality was rougher. Inside were crates of polymer wings and racks of drones. The Prime Minister's guards bristled at the unusual equipment, and the team was not on the security clearance list. The head of site security argued with Adewale until Inspector Aguilar sent in confirmation. 40 minutes wasted. Meanwhile, the most critical piece of their hardware, the disguised winch truck, sat fully exposed on the curb of Calle de la Princesa. When the Green Company finally set up, they unfurled the lighter-than-air flying wing frame, like a giant sideways cigar with a flattened bottom. Its polymer superstructure was rough to the touch, like coarse denim, a weave engineered to catch light without reflecting it. Makar dragged his gloved hand across the fabric, feeling the slight rasp as if the material itself wanted to resist smoothness. One by one, the interior hydrogen balloons filled inside its ribbed compartments, swelling pale and taut. Between them, nitrogen hissed in, cushioning every cell in a sheath that would quench flame and slow rupture. Leaks were inevitable. A pinhole hissed along the trailing edge. Makar pressed his ear close, heard the faint whistle, and signaled for patch resin. Another seam tore under tension, and Serhi and Rasmus stitched it shut with polymer thread, hands tacky with adhesive. By 9, the structure was swollen into form. The gondola truss hung beneath, skeletal and waiting. The gondola carried concussive warheads that generated only blast pressure. They were built to knock drones from the air with shockwaves that struck from several angles, keeping collateral damage low in crowded streets. Radar and LiDAR pods mounted alongside gave the platform its vision. A tether unspooled from the truck as the balloon lifted quietly into the sky. When pedestrians asked about the lighter-than-air craft, the crew handed out flyers with Prime Minister Ismael Cortázar Ruiz's campaign slogans and login details for free public Wi-Fi. When the winch engaged, the wing lifted, jittering slightly as overpressure vents tested their flow. It climbed until its profile spread against the sky, a hazy outline, so diffuse it might have been mistaken for heat shimmer. After the siesta, the team gathered to prepare for the afternoon rally when a grainy clip landed in their secure channel, a bloodied blindfolded Lucien bound to a chair. A voice speaking Russian demanded, "Withdraw and walk away." Adewale folded the ruined cup into his palm and kept his face blank. Makar looked at each of them before he spoke, measured and uncompromising. We cannot divide ourselves. Attempting both a rescue and a defense will doom them both. If we pursue Lucien, the Prime Minister dies. If we stay, Lucien suffers. But there is a chance that he survives. The table was silent. Mart said firmly, "He recruited us. He believed in us." Katrin, eyes on her husband, answered, "He'd tell us to finish the mission." Makar thought of Arvo in the pit, pushing him forward. He swallowed and said, "We hold." Adewale stood. "One thing I've learned is never leave a man behind. The team doesn't need 2 drone operators." Makar knew that being short a drone operator was cutting the margin razor thin. He also knew Adewale was leaving no matter what he decided, so he said, "The Uzbek is in town." Others offered names of people they trusted, and Makar thought maybe it was enough. The plaza was packed, and the Prime Minister's guards blanketed it with standard security. Buildings were cleared for snipers. Counter-snipers stood on the roofs along with people holding anti-drone jammers and electronic warfare packs, their gear gleaming under the fading light. Makar thought it was useless, and his stomach dropped at how little they understood. The world was not ready for a fiber-optic drone assassin, not ready for the first time a prime minister or a president turned into pink mist live on every screen. Above, the lighter-than-air platform drifted, its sensors stitched together a radar and LiDAR map of the surrounding blocks, its audio net sharpened by years of social media clips from the plaza. Rallies, concerts, tourist chatter, trained to sift the ordinary from the anomalous. The Volga group waited until twilight, when specialized mics well beyond the plaza perimeter caught the sudden crack of 2 Cornet igniter charges. The mic's time of arrival math gave the AI bearings before radar even confirmed the launches. Seconds later, the rising whine of the missiles climbing toward the lighter-than-air platform reached the plaza, while 2 fiber-optic drones raced low for the Prime Minister. One came screaming down Calle de Martín de los Heros. The other suddenly arched high over the rooftops from Calle del Rio. The Green Company moved before anyone else even knew. Standard security protocols weren't built for this new war. They didn't even realize the threats were inbound. Tomas, Pilar, Andri, and Oksana set a perimeter. Serhi stepped in as the backup drone operator. Mart took overwatch with his rifle. Katrin screamed into the joint security channel to move the Prime Minister. Rasmus ran to the Prime Minister's guard liaison. But none of the threats were visible, so the Prime Minister's guards froze, losing critical seconds. The Cornets were launched far from outside the plaza, but they were faster, rapidly closing the distance to the platform hundreds of meters in the air. The defensive drones immediately and automatically launched, after detecting the ignition clicks and drone motors having approximately a 2-second lead. Makar watched as 8 pairs dropped from the gondola and broke wide in formation, trailing silvery fiber optic cables, 2 pairs for each target. The AI plotted crude but effective attack paths, but successful Cornet interception is around 40%, so Makar immediately put the lighter-than-air platform into evasive motion. Each Cornet would be boxed between 2 cheap drone sets. The lead drone sprayed a fuel-rich mist, and the trailing unit carried a detonator charge. It was ugly, off-the-shelf tech grafted into a missile shield, but it only had a chance of working because of the AI brain trained in advance on telemetry, with LIDAR guiding the final moments. The first intercept lit clean and worked exactly as designed. The mists bloomed into a cloud on each side, boxing in the Cornet, and detonators flared the mists into a pressure wave that caused just enough damage to the fins for the Cornet to fly off course. The second attempt failed. The first cloud touched off too early by a gust or laser jitter. The second set aborted in response. As missiles shrieked overhead, The plaza dissolved into panic. A few bystanders froze, phones raised to capture the strange beauty of the deadly duel. As the fiber-optic drones broke the plaza perimeter, the Prime Minister's guards uselessly fired their jammers into dead air, then panicked and snapped shots at the drones. Prime Minister Ruiz was dragged from the podium toward an armored SUV and raced for the one exit that looked clear. The vast flying wing jittered into evasive motion at a snail's pace, its broad frame groaning as control surfaces snapped and electric props strained. Makar dumped overpressured nitrogen through vents, a puff that jolted the ship sideways just enough. The incoming warhead's blast shoved the platform farther still, turning what should have been a direct strike into a grazing burst. Shrapnel ripped through the skin, puncturing a handful of hydrogen cells, but the gas bled off harmlessly. The airship sagged and creaked, but the massive wing held most of its buoyancy and stayed aloft just long enough to guide the last defensive drones towards the racing drone assassins. As skilled as the Volga Group drone operators were, their every movement was anticipated. The lighter-than-air platform's AI ran every step automatically, and with the elevation advantage, the Green Company struck first, every time. Makar's defensive drones spread above the fiber-optic assassin drones and knocked them down with overpressure concussive blasts. But Serhai, watching the broader angles, spotted the trap. "Makar, it's an ambush!" He pointed to the one exit left open, where a loitering drone could be hidden in the curb clutter like a roadside bomb, waiting for the SUV. "Just like what we did in Tijuana, herding sheep to the obvious exit," Serhii said gravely. Makar disengaged 2 aborted drones' parachutes and dropped them toward the 2 most likely ambush spots, hoping gravity would crush the hidden assassins before they struck the SUV. But he couldn't rely on hope. Makar said grimly, "Mart, shatter the glass panels in the path of the SUV." Mart hesitated, knowing the risk, then laid flat, steadied his rifle, and exhaled. Glass sprayed in front of the Prime Minister's SUV, causing it to slow just enough for the kinetic bombardment to work. Secondary detonations confirmed both suspected sites had hidden drones. The team cheered until a sniper, misreading Mart's fire in the direction of the Prime Minister's vehicle, put a round through his skull. Miami, United States, 2038. Even 6 years later, Makar remembered the way Katrine's horror twisted into a rictus smile at the suddenness of Mart's loss. The moment never faded. He still felt the pain every time he wrote a name in the company's ledger. Fiercely, Makar relived the memory of opening the worn leather cover and writing, "Mart Pold, saved Spain and NATO E." Over time he learned that while there are moments when lives must be risked, that most missions are worth failing if it means keeping his people alive. Katrin bore her grief differently. She spent the rest of her life tearing open Russia's breeding camps, their grotesque attempt to stave off demographic collapse. The ledger was closed, but its weight carried forward into every room he entered, even 12 years later in Miami. Makar steadied his heart, reminding himself of the debt he owed to the people he had led. The conference room overlooked Miami's Biscayne Bay. Sunlight flashed across the water and scattered through the glass walls. Inside, the air was cool and hummed with the steady whisper of conditioned air. Makar adjusted his tie, the gesture stiff, unnatural on him, then began. The screen lit with the schematic of the Green Company's latest generation lighter-than-air platform, its design evolving through 12 years of battle testing. The world saw what elevation combined with the speed of AI could achieve in Madrid, he told the semicircle of investors. Since then, we've expanded from persistent defense to search and rescue. Once a baseline is created within a region, our platforms detect the faintest signs of life, whether in a forest or a collapsed building. With each baseline added, Our offerings have expanded to early warnings for avalanches, piracy, and forest fires. That growth is reflected in our numbers with 15% compounded returns and 40% profit margins. Kazuo Nakamura, a co-founder of Kazuna Capital, cut in. 40% margins aren't defense contractor economics. What exactly are you selling, Makar? Makar smiled broadly. The airships are the hardware, but the value is in the data. Millions of hours of audio, a data moat no competitor can replicate. That's why our services come in at a quality and cost that no one else can touch. Governments, shippers, insurers, they're finding we aren't optional anymore. We're becoming infrastructure. The door opened. A man entered without introduction, and everyone instinctively stood in a sign of respect. But Makar stared, his pulse loud in his ears. Shocked recognition broke across his face, sharp and unguarded. Arvo! He studied the images on the screen, but his eyes settled on Makar. His voice was calm, deliberate. No, my friend. My name is Mikhail Mirov. Author's note. This novel began as a response to two troubling global trends. The first is the growing comfort with nuclear appeasement. The second is the steady rise of global political violence. Through this story, I wanted to explore the dangers of both while offering a possible path forward through the idea of the Charter, a political framework built to redefine what a state can be. This book is the first in a planned 9-part series. The first trilogy begins in a near-future world grounded in realism and science, and its later volumes move beyond Earth to the cloud cities of Venus and the scavenger worlds of dead civilizations, where technology has become indistinguishable from magic. The second trilogy carries these ideas into a fantasy realm. The third trilogy unites both universes into one. The Charter and its principles form the through line of the entire series, expressed in its central creed. Every life is sovereign. If you have listened this far, thank you. Please consider liking or subscribing to help this story and its message reach more people.